Hello all, 1,124 of you. I'm Redkwan, also known as the only person who doesn't know when or why everyone started accepting that Metroid Prime 4 was for sure coming in 2019. But I still definitely have a valid opinion on the game, so you should probably stick around. Nailed it! Metroid Prime 4. It's a game! And based on the reveal trailer and the fan anticipation, as well as the previous history of Metroid mostly always, being really good, I think Metroid Prime 4 is going to be a really big deal. So if Metroid Prime 4 is going to be a huge game for Nintendo, it might make sense that they would do the same things as they have with the other big games on the Switch. Games like Breath of the Wild, Mario Odyssey, and Smash Ultimate. But mostly Breath of the Wild because that's the topic of the video. Breath of the Wild was Zelda in a huge open world, with a greater focus on exploration and multiple paths to a single objective, with new abilities and concepts that felt completely different from past games. And from the way Nintendo has treated their major Switch games, like Zelda, and the way they've changed and rejuvenated these series, can we take any hints about what Metroid Prime 4 will be, and will Metroid Prime 4 pull a Breath of the Wild? So, what does it mean to pull a Breath of the Wild? Well, it all starts with tossing a ton of Korok seeds everywhere and calling it content. I'm partially serious. Breath of the Wild took Zelda from a more linear puzzle game to a more open exploration type of game, and they did this through the giant game world and numerous collectibles. Pulling a Breath of the Wild means opening the game up and allowing the player more freedom and more choice, as well as forgetting any series conventions that don't fit in. Pulling a Breath of the Wild would be for a game to try something completely new for the series, and not look back at past games for ideas and structure, but to reimagine the game from the ground up. Breath of the Wild also took inspiration from the original Zelda game, which I suppose could be a piece of pulling a Breath of the Wild, but I honestly have no clue what the first Metroid did because it looks kinda trash. No offense, Shamus. But what would that mean for Metroid? Should we get the Korok seeds ready? Well, Metroid operates a little differently from Zelda. For one, Metroid isn't broken into segments so much as Zelda is. In the old Zelda games, you would do an assortment of tasks, then head into a dungeon, and that would repeat throughout the game, with each piece being a separate little section. Metroid doesn't really work like that. Sure, you can break it off into the several areas or boss fights, but the game world in Metroid is almost the equivalent of a big Zelda dungeon. But even though it's not a direct translation, I think Metroid and Zelda are similar enough that a lot of the things still apply. Both Metroid and Zelda focus on combat and puzzle solving, with major boss fights, as well as the concept of item attainment and progression through the acquisition of powers. And yes, I do have a word of the day calendar. Man, I need to stop making jokes only people over the age of 50 will understand. But the point is, Zelda and Metroid are similar in enough ways to where a lot of the same changes would apply. Zelda took the segments from past games and opened it all up, taking the series from a system of working from dungeon to dungeon to a more seamless experience, where the player traverses a world to improve. Metroid would do the same, taking the relatively enclosed rooms and areas and breaking them out into a bigger and more open world. I'm not saying it would need to be an open world game to pull a Breath of the Wild, as they say, but I could see something more along the lines of the transition of something like Mario Galaxy to Mario Odyssey. Metroid only works because some things are closed off without certain items and abilities, which would make it almost impossible to work in a true open world without really changing up what the series is about. But having areas that were larger, or multiple branching pathways to get places, and overall just having something a little more connected, could work. Another piece of what Breath of the Wild did, that would need to be done by Prime 4 to quote-unquote pull a Breath of the Wild, would be to completely alter the progression system. Past Zeldas, like Metroid's, always did progression by finding items that allowed the players to reach new areas. But in Breath of the Wild, all your abilities for the entire game are there at the beginning. The only way the player improves throughout the game is by finding more powerful weapons and getting more health and stamina. But this might be a little hard for Metroid to change, because while the Zelda series used item progression for dungeon puzzles and puzzles that didn't happen to be in dungeons, so I guess more generally puzzles, Metroid uses the items as a way to progress through the game. The way Zelda uses the items was replaceable by other types of puzzles, but it's not like Prime 4 could just allow you to get better at opening doors instead of using, say, a wave beam. It doesn't really work like that. But maybe for Metroid to pull a Breath of the Wild would mean something more along the lines of having a larger focus on the combat of the items rather than the progression uses of them, although some would definitely still need to be there, and maybe the item number would be lower, but with the ability for improvement. So now the question this video has been about: will Metroid Prime 4 have Korok seeds? Wait, that's not it. Will Metroid Prime 4 pull a Breath of the Wild? Seriously? What kind of garbage question is that? So will Metroid Prime 4 pull a Breath of the Wild? Apparently that's the question now. I kinda think it will, but I also kinda think it won't. This is why you come to Redkwan for my expert opinion. But what I mean by that is that I think Metroid will definitely change a lot of stuff after the long wait and the huge anticipation, and I think it'll probably take a note out of Breath of the Wild's page and open up a little more. I also could see there being a greater focus on item and character improvements, as opposed to all the focus being on getting new abilities, although I think that will be less of a change if it happens. But honestly, Metroid Prime games are already like Metroid's Breath of the Wild if you really think about it. The game world is huge and expansive, and it runs together seamlessly, with different paths and ways to do things. It already has a huge focus on exploration, and already has a major focus on straight-up combat. It even got the minimal and probably not quite deep enough story right, although I probably shouldn't complain. Other M. So will Metroid Prime 4 pull a Breath of the Wild? I don't see it going nearly as deep with the changes as Zelda did, but I do think a lot of similar changes are possible and likely to happen. But really, Metroid Prime 4, even if it's similar to the other Metroid Primes, already would do a lot of what Breath of the Wild set out to do for Zelda without even trying. You show off? Well, I'm Redkwan. Do you think Metroid Prime 4 will pull a Breath of the Wild? Is that a good way to put what I'm trying to say, even at all? Sounds a little dumb, but whatever. It's a Redkwan video, so you shouldn't have expected anything better. Anyways, I'm Redkwan, thank you all for watching, and I'll hopefully see you all later. Goodbye.